But on the web, most of the work I've been doing it with the PHP and with Ruby, specifically with Ruby on Rails. And performance was always an issue. You know, applications are built once, but then if they become more successful, they need to grow all the time. And as the volume of data grows and as the number of users grows, sooner or later there will be scaling issues. So at some point in 2015, at the beginning of the year, while I was having some scaling issues at work with some PHP application, I was wondering if maybe there isn't any kind of new language that would be able to help with performance issues. I was looking for something that felt a lot like Ruby or maybe like Python. It was very easy to learn, very easy to use, very nice syntax, very readable, but which provided high performance benefits. So that's how I stumbled into Julia. It was a very new project back then. I think it was version 0.4 or 0.5. There was no web framework, so I thought the language had a lot of potential. I wanted to try it work, and then that's how I started to work on Genie and to develop the project, which became the first Julia web framework. The name Genie came from this idea of having a bit of a helper, somebody that would help you become very productive in developing web applications. So started work on it beginning of 2015. I think first commit was towards the end of the year. It was very, very influenced by MVC frameworks like Ruby on Rails. So initially it was more like Julia on Rails in a way, but in the next few years, as the Julia ecosystem is consolidating, the ways of doing things in Julia have settled. For example, how to load dependencies, how to manage packages, how to load code. Genie had also followed up, and then in a couple of years, it has become a pure Julia framework, which does things 100% the Julia way. Surprisingly, there was a lot of interest for web development with Julia. So Genie has always been one of the most starred Julia packages. It was top 10, maybe now top 15 most starred Julia packages on GitHub. And it provides a very powerful and complete toolbox building web applications, including a powerful router. It's got its own view templates. It has support for environments, session and cookie management, caching, encryption. It's got a lot of code generators that make things really easy. It has support for WebSockets, and it has a growing plugins ecosystem. It's like it's stable.
Maybe jump in. Let me jump in. Just short notice for everyone. I started the recording, so just that you know, you're of course invited to also join with questions. Yeah, but whoever doesn't want to be on the recording, that you know, recording is still running.
All right. Okay, it's reasonably well tested, so it's got close to 300 unit tests now. Documentation it's decent to start with. There's always room for improvement. In terms of approach, it uses conventional over configuration, which means that, like for example, I don't know, Java frameworks where extensive configuration files are used. With Genie, similar to Rails and Django, things are done more by convention. For example, files being placed in a certain location and files being loaded in a certain way, so that it's basically less code to write. It's been used in production for many years, and it had reached 40 contributors and over 1,100 commits. The Genie is more like Genie framework is more of an ecosystem. So it started with Genie framework, which is the core web framework, which is used to build standard web applications and web APIs. And the application can be enhanced with additional plugins. For example, Genie Authentication, which provides a layer of database-backed logging and authentication. Genie Auto Reload, which is a plugin which automatically reloads the code in the browser when working with files and when developing. Genie UI, which is a new project which provides a higher level of libraries and UI elements, for example, to render data frame or to generate drop-downs based on arrays, just things to make things faster and more productive. Another element, another project in the ecosystem is Searchlight, which is a library, an ORM library. It's basically a set of tools for managing databases and working with data within Genie applications. And the newest project is Steeple, which is a library for building reactive user interfaces for Julia applications, also built on top of Genie. And it's very similar, for example, to Dash. So it's mostly for single-page applications, which are very interactive. Something is updated on the or changed on the page, and I don't know, we render plots or data tables. And it's focused on building data-centric applications and data dashboards. Some resources here, some links. I'm going to share the link to the presentation. So if you want to look later on the website and the repo and the documentation. Yeah, which brings us to the topic of today. What are we going to build? We'll just go over the process of creating a web application, which allows the users to search a database of Netflix titles and yeah, to find something to watch. It's going to be a ModelViewController application, MVC app, which is going to use Genie and Searchlight to connect to the database. It's going to use an SQLite backend because it's easier to set up. But all the database interactions will be agnostic, so we can use MySQL or Postgres because the ORM just abstracts away all the database details. It's going to allow searching for titles and displaying the results. It would also expose the data in the form of an API. And then if we have time, we're going to see how we can create a login protected section for admin users. This is what it's going to look. So we can call it Watch Tonight. It's got the search form. These are some results that are being displayed after the search. The same results being displayed as a REST API. And this would be the admin protected area if we get the chance to do it. Okay, let me close this. Any questions so far? Okay, no then. Let me share the other screen. Okay. This is the application as well, running on my local host, just to give you a feeling of what we're trying to build. So when we land on the page, we get a recommendation, which is a random movie coming from the database. Every time the user refreshes, they're going to get a different title. And if they search for something, say comedy, they're going to get a list of results as such. And we're also going to expose this endpoint, which will display the same results as REST API endpoint.
Adrian, maybe one question at the front.
Yeah.
Because I think that's really one question which a lot of people have in their minds.
Yeah.
When you built this app in the very start, coming from all the other web apps, you mentioned, I think it was before the meeting started also, that performance was an issue. Did you experience performance improvements when now switching to Julia?
Yes, I mean, we all know that Julia introduces a different computation model, let's say. So with Ruby on Rails and with PHP and with Python, they are interpretive. So they're in a sense they're scripting languages. So yeah, performance. The scripts are being executed at runtime, and performance can be an issue with large applications and experiencing a large amount of traffic. While yes, Julia, because it's being compiled after the initial call, after the initial compilation phase, the performance gets it improves very, very well. So we have used it forward to build some internal applications and some APIs. And indeed, the performance has improved quite a lot in terms of data processing and handling a large number of connections. But I mean, Julia by itself is not necessarily the solution to all problems. If, for example, the bottleneck is in the database, then Julia won't be able to help with that. But yes, indeed, we did experience improved performance running Julia compared to, say, PHP or Ruby on Rails backends.
Thank you very much. It's awesome.
You're welcome. All right. Let me share. I set up a repo for the application. I'm going to paste the link in the chat. I set up the README with the walkthrough of the application that we'll be building, and as well the repository contains the full completed application. So yeah, as we were saying, the objective is to build an application, a catalog, which allows the users to search a database for Netflix titles. And it will provide two ways to interact with the data. One will be a user-facing web page with a search field, and the other one will be a REST API so that other clients can interact with the data. I don't know of how much experience the attendants have with developing web applications. And if the idea of MVC ModelViewController apps is very clear, but basically what ModelViewController means is it's a design pattern which is very common for web applications, especially for more complex ones, where the logic is being split between a model, multiple views, and a controller. The model is a series of classes or entities which are in charge with communicating with the database and accessing the data. The views are in charge of rendering the data in various formats, either as HTML or maybe as JSON. And the controllers are entities which, let's say, stand between models and views and coordinate the data exchanges between the two. ModelViewControllers have been successfully used for creating user interface or user-facing applications, and it's a common design patterns, for example, for Ruby on Rails, for Django, for ASP.NET, and for other widely used web frameworks. All right, let's see how we can create this application using Genie. And first, let's start the Julia repo. Let me show we have Genie installed. If we don't have it, we need to add it. We'll use add Genie. Genie is already registered in the Julia repository. If you don't have it, you can add it with pkg add Genie. And once we have it, we need to say that we'll be using Genie. Okay. And Genie comes with a series of application generators. So we basically don't need to create or scaffold the applications by ourselves. So we can use a series of APIs that are part of the Genie library to create the application for us. As such, in order to create a new app, we can use the Genie new app _MVC command and pass the name of the application that we want to build. For example, we're going to say Genie new app. I'm just going to take it from here. And Genie will create now a new type of ModelViewController application. Okay, a bit slow. Okay.
And is this creating files on the system?
Yes, exactly. This will create the application in a new folder. We'll set up all the files needed by the application. We'll install all the dependencies, and by default, we'll start the web server with the application. It was the test app. So here we can see how Genie uses PKG to set up all the dependencies. It goes through all the steps. It created a project TOML. It installs all the app dependencies.
Just a quick question. So it's recommendable to kind of create an empty new folder where you first move to and then call this function new app?
But not necessarily, because Genie is creating a folder to host the application, so it's not going to overwrite anything that's already in the folder.
Great. Perfect. Thanks.
No problem. I think the video is using a lot of CPU, so it's a bit slow. Let's see if I can make it faster. Okay. Is it okay in terms of size? Is it easy to see what's on the screen, or should I zoom in?
A little zoom would be okay, but
Yeah.
I can see everything, but a bit zoom is preferable.
It's okay.
Yeah, looks good. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
No problem. Now let's make this also a bit larger. Wow, this is very slow. I'm not sure. Why is it fetching the registry so slowly? Anyway, now that we're at this topic and while waiting for this, it's worth mentioning that Genie generators offer a few options. So building an MVC app is one of the alternatives, but by default, just calling Genie new app is going to create a simpler kind of application. Let's call it a script-oriented app, which is pretty much the core for creating a minimal application, and which contains a route file, doesn't include any kind of database support. It doesn't include the templating engine, and it's used more for scripting and for creating these simpler applications. However, starting with the basic Genie application, the generator API allows progressively extending previously created application by, for example, adding database support, adding MVC support. So we can start simple. We can start exploring with a simple script, and then as the application grows, we can just add more features as the application grows. Okay. Finally, it managed to get all the dependencies. It pre-compilated all the packages needed for the application, and because we indicated that we want to use an MVC app, that basically means that we want to have database support. So at this point, Genie is asking us what kind of database backend we want to use, and this is provided by Searchlight, which is the ORM, and which supports 3 database backends: SQLite, MySQL, and Postgres. And like we said, we're going to use SQLite because, we don't have to set up any kind of database server. We're just going to say one. And then Searchlight is going to add SQLite support to the application. It's almost done. Now it's starting the web server. Yes, it is possible to set up multiple applications. There's a question in the chat if it is possible to install multiple instances of Genie on one server. So we can create as many applications as we want, and then it's just an issue of running them basically. So each application is run on a port. So one very easy solution is to have multiple applications running on different ports. By default, all applications would be started on port 8000, but we can run them on any random port that we want. Although in production, we usually don't expose ports like 8000. It would run like a standard web application on port 80. And in general, it would use a web proxy like Nginx or Apache. So we have a web server, Nginx or Apache, running on port 80, and this is going to proxy the request onto the Julia Genie web app running in the backend on a certain port, and it's just going to forward the requests. In the Genie docs, there is a tutorial about deploying with an Nginx web proxy. But yeah, basically multiple Genie apps can be started on different ports, and then we can configure Nginx or Apache to serve the application, just like, say, different PHP hosts or different PHP applications running on one server. Okay, so at this point, our application has been created and it's been automatically started and is now being available on localhost at port 8000. Okay, there's another question in the chat. Let's see. How do you compare Genie with HTTP.jl? Does the extra MVC features have an overhead on simple apps? Yes, in the book Julia Programming Projects, I used HTTP.jl. Exactly. Genie does provide a richer API in terms of toolset and features, and it makes a lot of things easier. It's a higher level web framework, while HTTP is more of a web server with a few utilities, let's say. In fact, Genie uses HTTP.jl as the web server. So in a sense, HTTP.jl is at the core of Genie, and then a modular architecture is being used by Genie in order to build extra features on top of HTTP.jl. The overload, because Genie uses a modular structure, we really only pick and choose the features that we need. So only the modules that we need to develop a certain application would be loaded. So there's no overhead at runtime. Although some of the more advanced feature, might be used all the time. For example, the router, if you want to use some of the advanced routing capabilities, that would be maybe more computationally intensive than using HTTP's router. I use HTTP.jl in the book because the book was more focused on let's say mainstream packages at the time, and Genie was still quite young, and it was a choice in this regard. I didn't want to focus on Genie at that point. Another question, is it right to load existing project by executing include? Sometimes it fails and says by executing include. I'm not sure. I would need to check. There are two ways to load Genie apps. Basically, now that the app has been created, if we look at the file system, we see that we have a bin folder here. Let's see. So Genie applications comes with the bin folder, which includes scripts to start the application, both for Unix files, for Unix systems, and for Windows. Yeah, over here.
Just a little remark for those wondering about the shell. You can activate this with semicolon.
Yeah.
Pressing semicolon, and the Julia REPL will give you the shell.
Yeah. Some of the things don't work so well on Windows, but I used to be on the Mac before. But yeah, the shell is quite okay though, but some things fail like that one. So yeah, as you can see here on the screen, basically the bin folder includes different scripts to start the Julia app, and that's either REPL or server. The REPL loads the application and drops the user on a Julia REPL to run multiple commands in the context of the application, including to start the server, while the server one loads the application and starts the server using the host and the port that has been configured. Another way is to start a Julia REPL in the context of the application of the project. As we can see, Genie apps are Julia application, Julia projects. They have a manifest and a project file. So we would start a Julia REPL in this folder, and we would activate the environment. And then we would call Genie load app, and that takes care of basically bootstrapping the whole application. So I wouldn't include Bootstrap.jl. I would use one of the two approaches, either with one of the files in bin, or loading the project just like any other Julia application, and then using Genie load app. If that still doesn't work, please open an issue on GitHub, and yeah, just add some details about how I can reproduce the issue, and I'll take a look. Okay, so our application is ready. It's running now at, let's see, this at port 127001 and port 8000. The first request is going to precompile, so it's going to be a bit slower. And we can see in the console that requests are being logged. Okay, this is the default homepage of a Genie application. It comes bundled with the framework, and it is meant to be overwritten by the developer. But it does point to some good directions if you're lost. So you can either go to the documentation, or you can go to the Gitter channel to ask questions if something doesn't work as expected. Okay. All right, how does this work? Let me open the code in VS Code. Because this is an MVP application, so it has to support database access and templating language and more complex view layers. The structure of the application is more involved. But as I was saying, the default type of application, which is targeting for scripting, is going to have a much simpler file structure with a lot less files and folders in here. If we take a look at the structure of the application, how this works now. So what happens when we go to localhost 8000? It's that the browser makes a request towards the host and the port, where the Genie application listens. And the first thing that it does is that it goes into the routes file, which will try to match a request. So this is basically the root of the application, like this, which will match this route, the slash, and then it will execute the route handler, which is defined here inside the route, which in this case, it just serves a static file, welcome HTML.
Adrian, can you make it a bit bigger again?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I can see everything, but it's just a bit easier.
Sure.
Yeah, perfect.
Like this? Yeah.
Yes, thanks a lot.
This is how static files, which are being placed inside the public folder, can be served with Genie. And this is just the welcome file that we can now see in the browser. Then the routes file is kind of like the brain, the central point, the dispatcher of the application. Any kind of endpoints that you want to define in the application, we're just going to add them to the routes.jl file. And then we will define handlers, which are Julia function that are supposed to return the content, which will be displayed and returned to the client. In terms of file and folder structure, just taking a very quick look. The manifest and project file are used by PKG. So these are Julia dependency management files. Bootstrap is one of the files which is automatically generated by Genie and normally should not be used by or edited by the users. These files are used by Git. The app application is specific for MVC web apps. So if you're creating, for example, a simple application, let's say a script-centric application, the app folder would not be present. The bin folder includes the scripts for starting the application. The configuration folder includes the various files to control the various settings of the app. Again, the database application is specific to an MVC app, and this contains all the logic for working and interacting with the application, with the database, sorry. The public folder is where the files that need to be accessed on the web are being placed. So anything that is being put here can be accessed directly on the internet, is being exposed by the web application, by the web server. The source file, again, is being used and created by the application, should not be edited. And the test folder includes unit tests for the applications to be edited by the developer. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. If there aren't any, then let's look at connecting to the database. As we said, the database folder includes all the information and all the settings for working with the database. And in order to define how the application should connect to the DB, we just need to edit the connection YAML file. If you're not familiar with the YAML file, this is pretty much pretty popular format or standard for defining user editable configuration. It's considered easy enough, so easier than XML or easier than JSON. So it should be quite straightforward to edit. Genie has the concept of environments, which means that various settings are being applied depending on how the application is being run. By default, the application is running in development mode, which means that certain settings or certain optimizations are being done in order, for example, to automatically reload and recompile the application by using revise.jl, while at the other end, when the app is running in production mode, the app is being optimized for high performance, and any kind of development features are being left out. Because the application by default is running in development mode, we will tell the database, the application, to connect to or to use the settings for development. I'm just going to take them from here. The first line tells the Genie application that it should use the same environment as it is now defined, which is dev. This is a global variable available in the application, and it tells that it should use the adapter as SQLite. And for the database, it should use DB, the Netflix_catalog SQLite database inside the DB folder. As we can see, this is not created yet, but because it is an SQLite database, the first time we try to connect to it, it will be created by the application. Oh, sorry, I need to close this because it's making noises. Okay. Normally, when the application is started, the configuration is loaded automatically upon startup. So the application picks the connection, connects to the database, and everything just works. But this time, because we're just setting up the connection and the app didn't have the possibility to load it at start time, we're just going to load the connection data manually. Another question: what other database does Genie support? Yeah, so Searchlight provides 3 adapters at this point: SQLite, MySQL, and Postgres. And the nice part about Searchlight is that it basically provides a unified interface to working with all these databases. So you can just swap backends. For example, you can use SQLite in development to keep it simple, but you can use MySQL in production, and the code would just be portable from one database to another, because Searchlight generates the queries and provides a Julia API to interact with the database. Okay, so let's tell the application to include the configuration and connect to the database. We go back to the REPL. And now, upon asking, upon including the initializer, the database access file, the application connects to the database, and the database, because it didn't exist, it gets created. In order to load the database configuration into the application, I included one of the initializers file. As you can see here, it's here, config initializers, Searchlight. All the files that are placed inside the initializer folder are being automatically loaded by application at startup. But as I was saying, because the database connection was not configured now when the app was created, we had to load the initializer by hand. And then what the initializer does, it loads the configuration YAML file. It checks that the adapter is being set. Right, so that the adapter, this one is different. It's not nothing, like in the case of production or test environments. And if that is the case, it automatically includes Searchlight and the specific adapter, so the SQLite adapter, and then it connects to the database. So now we have a connection to the database, and we can see that the SQLite DB has been created here. Obviously, it's empty at this point. Now that we have a database, we can create our first resource. Basically, a resource in an MVC app is a business entity, is a piece of data that we exposed on the internet and which can be accessed at a certain URL. So we can imagine an entity, a resource, as being a product or a user or a book, or in our case, is going to be a movie. In a Genie MVC app, a resource also is represented by a bundle, which puts together various files to manage this resource. And these files can be models, views, controllers, as well as validator files, test files, and migration files, for example, to modify the structure of the database. In order to create a new resource, we need to run Genie new resource and pass the name of the resource that we want to create. So, for example, if you want to create the movie resource, which is what our application will expose on the internet, we're just going to say Genie new resource movie. The new resource generator. Let's see what happened. Okay, I don't know. Some errors, but they are from some different packages. I don't know, from pooled arrays.
For me, it just works.
Yeah, it works. They come from some dependencies of, I don't know which package, from struct types. I don't know what uses that. Anyway, here at the bottom, we can see that a series of files have been created, and these files we're going to use in the next step in order to access and expose the movie data. So it created a movies controller file. It created a model. It also created a database migration. We're going to get to that soon. It created a validator, and it also created a unit test. We can see that the files have been placed here in the app, in the resources folder. It created another folder called movies, And here we created all the files. Okay, here there's a bit of an issue. I need to look into it. It should have uppercase else in order to stick with Julia's naming conventions. So I just edit it by hand, but normally it should have worked. Okay, so we got a movie model, we got a controller, which is just empty, it's a placeholder, movies validator, which we're not going to use, and which also should have been named. I pushed some changes before earlier today, and apparently something got broken.
For me, everything is capitalized.
Is it?
Yeah, actually, yeah.
I wonder why it didn't work for me. Maybe because of the wording above, something like that, I don't know. Okay. So all these resources have been created for us, and now we have all the placeholders, we have all the files that are needed in order to work with movie entities. However, our database is empty, so we need to create a table that will hold our movie data. And in order to do this, we're going to use database migrations. Migrations being scripts which are used to modify the schema of a database. The idea with migrations is, if you haven't used them, that when you work in a team, for example, or when you need to make changes to the database that can be reproduced in a different environment, we need to be able to apply these changes consistently. So that's why instead of everybody going into the database and making changes and basically losing track of how these changes are being applied and how the database is being modified, we just create these migration scripts, which will be placed under version control, which will be shared with all the team. And also, of course, we can run them when we deploy the application in production. So if the database is built by applying various migration files, then, for example, when we deploy the app, our deployment script will run all the migrations in order, and then we'll apply all the changes to the database schema. Searchlight comes with a system for managing migrations. Basically, it needs to help us understand which migrations are being run, which migrations need to be run against the database, and it needs to know the order in which this migration needs to be run to apply the changes in a meaningful way. So the previous command should have created a migration file for us. Let's see if we have it. Database. It should be in the database migrations folder. And as we can see, it put it here. Because we told Genie to create a new movie resource, then as this is being an MVC app, Genie considered that, okay, we need some sort of a database table to hold our data, and it created the database migration script for us. This is just a placeholder, but it shows you the DSL that is being used in order to apply database changes. And it's quite easy to read. And the advantage of this is also that we don't need to write Swiss SQL by hand. So it's not going to be database specific. This kind of migration can be run against all the database backends which are being supported by Genie and by Searchlight. The idea of migration is that it has two actions. It has an up action and a down action. The up action is going to apply the changes to the database schema, in this case, create the table. And the down phase, it's the reverse of the operation of the modification of the schema. So basically, it informs how to undo the changes that have been applied by the migration, in case we want to cancel the changes that we've done to the database. I'm going to take the code. I'm just going to put it here. And we're preparing a table which is going to be called movies. It's got a primary key, and it has a series of columns, type, which is of type string, 10 chars, title, which is a string of length 100. Then we have a list of directors, actors, the country where the movie was produced, the year when it was made, the rating, the categories, and the description. Actually, I realized that I haven't showed you the data file that we'll be using. So it looks like this. It's a public data set that I downloaded from the internet, and it's this CSV file. The type can be TV show or movie. The title is a string. Here you can have a director. It has the cast, which is a comma-separated list of actors. The country where it's being made. The data on is being added to Netflix, the release year, the rating, the duration, the categories where it's being listed in, and the description of the movie. So in here with the migration, we're creating a table which is going to have columns for some of the data in the CSV file. We're also using the migrations API to add a series of indexes. So we're creating an index on the title, on the actors, and the categories and the description, as this will be columns that will be used for the search. We don't need to create an index for the primary key, as this is being already created by the primary key function. The down function of the migration just drops the table, so basically it will undo all the modifications done by the up function. Any questions here in regards to the migrations? Okay. As I was saying, in order for the application to know which migrations are being run and the order in which to run them, Genie and Searchlight also need to keep track of what migrations have actually been executed so far. And in order to do this, it uses a table which is also stored in the same database, and we need to ask Genie to create it. We have a generator for that, so we're just gonna tell it to create the migrations table. Okay, the migrations table has been created, so now we can already interact with the migrations API. For example, we can ask if there are any migrations that it knows of and what's the status of these migrations. As you can see, the migrations API told us that there is a create table movies migration, which is down, so it means it hasn't been run yet. If we now run the migration by calling glass-top, it's going to run the code in this module and is going to create the movies table for us. Okay, so now the table has been created. If we try to look again at the status, we're going to see the migration now has been up. So the code has been run. The next step, now that we have the database and that we have the table, is to create a model, which is a Julia type within a dedicated module, which knows how to interact and knows how to work with movie instances from the database. The file itself has already been created by the new resource function. So we'll have it here in the movies file, and we'll just set it up as follows. Following Julia conventions, it's a standard module. It uses Searchlight, and it exports struct, which maps the columns in the table that we have just created. Basically, the idea of the ORM is that it maps an object to a row in a database table. So a class is going to, or a struct is going to correspond to a table, and then an instance of that struct is going to correspond to a row in the table. So any object that we're creating here is going to have a correspondent in the database table that it maps to. So in this case, we have this struct movie, and we can easily recognize all the fields which map to the columns which we have just created, right, which are here. Okay, now that we have code for our model, we can already interact with the database. So for example, if we go back to the REPL, we can load the model and we can create a movie object. we have set up the title and the actors, and due to the settings that we put here, we gave it the default type to be a movie. So we can see all the properties here. The Searchlight API allows us to also work with the data. So for example, we can check if our object has been already persisted in the database. So if it has been saved, it was not. So we can call, for example, the save function to persist it in the database. We can see here in development mode that in the REPL also the queries which are being executed are being shown. So we can see that here an insert operation has been run, and then the last insert ID has been retrieved. Also, the API allows for interacting and getting other data. For example, we can now count the instances of movie elements in the database. Of course, it's only one, the one that we just created. We can see how Searchlight creates the SQL code for us, or we can get all of them, which is also, of course, there are some warnings which also come from the SQLite package. But yeah, the all retrieves all the instances, all the movie objects from the database. Okay, the next point now that we have the model and that we have the database table would be to just move all the data from the CSV file into the database so that the users would be able to query the Netflix movies catalog. The easiest way to do this, and so that it can be replicated, is to create a seeding file. So we have a question. Sorry?
There's one question I just wanted to.
Yeah. So if is abstract model interface a requirement for plugging in Searchlight? Can arbitrary extract? Yes, it is a requirement. Basically, all the Searchlight API works with instances of abstract model. So yes, it has to be a subtype of abstract model. Okay, you're welcome. As such, let's create a small script which will help us transfer all the data from the CSV file into the database, so that then we're able to work with it. I'm just going to create a file. There's no generator for this. Inside the DB seeds folder, which already exists in the applications, I'm going to create a seedsmovies.jl file. Let's see. I created it here. It's an empty file, and we'll just turn it into a small script, which will create all the data and insert it in the database. So as we can see, the seeding script will run in the context of the application. As such, it has access to the environment of the application. For example, it can see the movies module. Here I have set up a few conversion utility functions just to handle some of the missing data that exists in the CSV file. And we're also going to be using the CSV package in order to go over the data from this CSV file. We're going to need to add this to our dependencies because the application doesn't have it. So let's add it in CSV, and meanwhile I will download the file, the CSV file, and I will put it in the applications folder. For example, this file, I'll just put it in the apps folder. Brilliant. tonight. Okay. I have the CSV file together with.
Excuse me, Adrian. Can you
just?
May have missed it, but can you share the link to the CSV file?
Yes, of course. Sorry about that. Here it is. You're welcome. All right. Let's see. Going back to the editor. All right, so we can see now that I pasted the CSV file into the applications folder in the seed folder. It's the same one that we saw on the Dropbox, all the columns. And now what the seed movies script does is basically it goes over each row in the CSV file, just loads it from the application folder. I put a limit to 1000 because it's almost 8000, so it would take too long. And then for each row, it creates a new instance of a movie object. It sets the type, title, directors, and all the other properties based on the data that it gets from the CSV from the row of the CSV. And then it saves it to the database. If we have the dependency, yeah, we have the dependency edit. Okay. So we have the CSV now. And now we need to include the seed script so we can run the seeding. Okay, it's been included. And now we can access the seed function. And now when we run it, I'm just going to import the first 1000 rows of the CSV file. It might take a bit. Okay. Let's see what happens. All right. So now basically runs over each of the rows, sets up the objects, and presses them to the database. In the REPL, we can see in development mode all the queries which are being run against the database for each of the objects. Almost there.
Yes, and Adrian, and
yeah.
if you have to bring more data into the database, there are ways to do it a little bit faster.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to show a bit how the models can be constructed and how can they be set.
Of
course. But I would, of course, you wouldn't do it one by one, right? So, for example, CSV has a way of doing it. The CSV package can actually create a table, a SQLite table, straight from a CSV file. Yes. Or, of course, you can at least run, I don't know, inserts in batch. Now it's basically, it was more of a play test case just to see how things work and how they are being done. Yeah, if you have a lot of data, obviously you don't want to do it like that. If there is not a lot of data, it's probably acceptable since this is being done only once. So it depends on if you favor readability and portability versus, I don't know, performance or, yeah. Yeah, that was the reason, because the first time I tried to import everything and 8,000 rows just took forever. So
yes, I tried this on Oracle with the Searchlight Oracle client.
Yeah,
and there are some mechanisms to bulk insert some things, and it's much faster.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
It's only a hint for somebody who have the task to import thousands of rows. Then there are possibilities to do this in a much more faster way and
Yeah.
not row by row.
Yes, agreed. Yes, absolutely. This could be extended, and I think it would be nice, well, later, or if anybody has time, basically all the APIs being exposed. So the query builder API is accessible, so somebody can look into the query which is being generated by Searchlight, and additional batch functions or methods could be added. For example, to take 1,000 rows, create one batch insert, and pass it over into a transaction or something like that. So further improvements can be done. This is just this is more to illustrate how to use scripts, how to use models, how to use Searchlight, how to run, how to create objects, and how to persist them. It's not performant. Yeah. All right.
Adrian, there's one question.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Is it possible to use multiple databases in the same project? Let me think. I haven't tried it.
Adrian, not today.
Yeah.
It's not possible today.
It's not possible. No, I was thinking if it's possible to like swap the connection, like to call, connect. And
no, if we want to provide multiple databases, we should go through the source code, because in many parts of Searchlight there's only the hint to one database. We do not show to a certain connection, and in some places there's only the search for the last entry in the database array. So that's not possible today. If there is a need for that, it should be done. It's not so many work, but not today. It's not possible.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not aware of. I mean, there's no support for it. I was just trying to think if it's possible to achieve it with whatever we have. But if you tried it and it doesn't work, then that would require additional extension. You're welcome. Okay, so now finally we have the data in the database, and we're about done with the model part of the application. So now we can focus on building the other parts. We can basically set up the web page to display the results. We touched in the beginning. We said that the routes folder is kind of the dispatcher of the application. So all the requests that go into the browser are going to be resolved by route here, where this part is being matched. It matches a pattern of the URL being requested, and then we have a handler function which can be defined here, or can be put as a reference, which will handle the request and will send back a response to the user. So our first step then is to define the new route, which will serve the movies catalog. So we'll just call it, or we'll serve it at /movies. And we'll say that the handler, so that the request is going to be resolved by the movies controller, and namely the index function of this module. Since we're referencing it, we also need to edit here. And the controller has already been created by us when we asked Genie to build the resource. So we can now just put the code in it. We're going to need the index function. For now, we're just going to put it as a placeholder to see that everything works, and just to give it a try. It should work. So for example, if we now go to movies, let's see what happens. Yeah, it works. So basically, we edit our new route. and we added a handler function, and the application picked it up and sent back the string as the response. This is all done with Revise. So this is, Revise is pretty amazing piece of code. Back in the beginning, it used to be very, very difficult to perform code reloads, and noticed how nice it is that every change that we make, files that we add, routes that we defined, methods that we put in our modules are just automatically being picked. Revise is being really, really good at that. Otherwise, it would have required multiple restarts of the application, basically, and reloading every time we made any considerable changes. But now this happens in development. So Revise is an integral part of Genie. And because it uses this convention over configuration approach, Genie knows where to expect various things to happen. So it knows that the routes need to go in a certain file. It knows that models and controllers go somewhere. So then it's being able to efficiently revise and detect code changes in all these files, so that the code that we write in development is being readily available. In production, however, because Revise can be quite expensive when monitoring the files on the file system, this is disabled by default. So the idea is that once the application is deployed, there aren't going to be any changes to it. So Revise is disabled in production for performance benefits. Okay, now that we've seen that we work, let's just add, let's make this function a bit more useful. So we'll ask you to do some work for us. And from Genie, we're going to use the HTML rendering module, which knows how to take data and returning back to the client as an HTML payload. We'll be using Searchlight, and we'll be using the movies module, which contains our model. And then what we do here in the index function is that we call the HTML function from the rendering module, which will output HTML, and we tell that we want it to render the view file from the movies resource. So this movies is the folder, the name of the resource, and we wanted to render an index view file, which we haven't created yet, and we wanted to pass into the view an instance of an object on array called movies, which will pick some random movies from the database when the user lands on the page. As such, we need to create the view file that is going to be used in order to render our HTML page. We see that we put it here. And this is Genie's templating language. Let me put it here just to see how it looks. This is in a sense HTML which embeds Julia code. So it's a form of templating language which is very HTML-like, so it supports all the HTML API. It can be pure HTML if we want to, but we can also include Julia code, which is being parsed and compiled, allowing us to create dynamic functionality in the view. So basically now what we do in the view is that we display the heading, the title of the page, which is called Watch Tonight. And then, as we said, we're passing the rend function will return an array of movies, of random elements. And we check and we say if nut is empty, then iterate over each item in the movies collection and render them using another view, which is called a partial, which will know how to represent a movie entity as HTML. While if it's if there is no movie in the collection, just show some default error message that there are no results. And we decided to also put these into a view partial. What is the difference between a view and the view partial? A view is used to display a large part of a page, so multiple elements, a lot of HTML code, pretty much all of the page, while a partial is being used to display a small piece of data. So, especially something that gets repeated multiple times. So, for example, if we want to display a list of 100 movies, then we will want this small piece of HTML template, which is in charge of rendering a movie element, to be repeated 100 times. So then we're going to use the view partial, which is being loaded in the view itself, and then it's just being used 100 times to display all the elements. So it's like a more dedicated piece of view, which is specialized to render just a certain piece of data. We're going to need to also create these view files, the partials. So I put it here. Question, is there any embedded tool in Genie to periodically update some components on the page? Or is it better to use JS? This is part of a different project, which is called Steeple. And Steeple is a library built on top of Genie, which is dedicated to creating reactive UIs for web applications, for Julia web applications. So that's very reactive. It uses a different architecture. It uses a model which is being exposed into the view, and then the data is being synchronized automatically. So when you change, for example, something in Julia, one of the properties of this view model, the data is automatically synchronized on the front when it's being picked up and the UI is being updated. And the same goes in reverse. So if you update something, any value on the front, then that value is going to be automatically updated in the Julia code. So that uses Julia and uses WebSockets or Ajax polling and Vue and a lot of, it provides rich functionality with a lot of Vue libraries like Plotly Vue and Vue UIs and so on. Can be Steeple used with Genie multi-page project? Yes, it can be. The tendency or more of the, let's say, architecture approach is to use, like Steeple is more designed to develop single-page applications as built, for example, with Node, where you have an API in the back end and the front end just stays on one page because there's usually no need to navigate across pages. The UI just updates dynamically. So think more interactive data dashboards. But there is absolutely no issue in having one Steeple page, which is within a multi-page Genie application. The only thing to consider is that a Steeple application might have considerable JavaScript, so it's going to load Vue, it's going to load whatever charting libraries, or it depends on the use case. So yeah, if you're going to navigate through multiple of such of these pages, if the JavaScript, for example, cannot be properly cached, or if it's not being used on all the pages, then these pages might take a bit longer to load. But yeah, normally there's absolutely no issue to do it like that. Okay. Notice that the movie file starts with an underscore. There's no requirement to do that. It's a naming convention to indicate that it's a partial file. What matters is what we pass here. So here we passed here. So we just passed the actual name of the file. Let's put the code in. You're welcome. In the HTML code, so as we said, this partial it's dedicated to just displaying one movie entity, one row of movie data. And as such, we see that we have HTML, which is being combined with JavaScript code, with Julia code. Sorry. let's see where we have it. Notice here then how we pass this instance variable into the view. So we pass an array of random movie elements. By default, this will only return one element. And here in the view, where we load the partial, again, we pass the same movie object, the one that is used here, and that is available inside the iteration. So the movie value is being then received inside the partial, and it's accessible here. So then this is one of our models. It's an instance of a model. So then we're able to access these properties. So we have movie title, year, type, rating, description, and so on. All the other properties being rendered inside the HTML code.
And then question.
Yes, please.
If you can go to the index.
Yes.
There is this for each. Can we also write the for each with a for loop, or is this kind of still convention to return an array, or does it do more stuff?
Yeah, what happens is that the templating language is string based in the sense, or I don't know, string centric, let's say. Pretty much everything that happens here should return a string, something that generates an output, which is then being used and rendered into the browser. So the really nice part about the Vue template and about the templating language in Genie is that it is not simple string parsing. I tried it in the beginning a few years ago, coming from Rails, for example, where everything is being evolved and just parsed at runtime, and evolving things into Julia in order to be able to parse the dynamic pieces of Julia code was terrible in terms of performance. Basically, on each request, this big template had to be evolved as a string, and that was really, really bad. So now what happens is that Genie's templates are compiled. So this HTML looking code is actually being, upon the first request, is being converted into a pure Julia code, which would generate the corresponding HTML output. What I'm trying to say is that, for example, this H1 would be created or turned into the HTML, into the Julia counterpart of this function, right? Like an H1 Julia function. Or if we're here, this div would be created into a div function, which inside would contain an H3 function, which would, does it make sense?
Yes.
So all the HTML code is being converted into pure Julia code, which can be compiled and precompiled, and it has very high performance. As such, all of these Julia functions need to output something. So otherwise, if the execution of the function doesn't have any kind of output, nothing results from the computation. And the issue with for loops is that they do not output anything. That's that was, yeah, the big issue. Either you can do a for, but then you need to collect the result of each iteration into some sort of string that would be returned at the end. I don't know. Does it make sense?
Yes, thanks a lot. And the for each is doing exactly this.
Yeah. So basically, it needs to be collected. I don't know if we can see it, but yeah, this macro is provided by Genie Renderer HTML, and it knows how to load the view, go over it for each iteration, collect all the output, and then return it at the end. Because otherwise, yeah, it would be either the task of the user, or basically the for loop would not produce what would be expected. I think it would basically return just the last iteration, if I'm correct. So this is the reason why the for each macro is being used.
Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. A question, Rand is picking one movie, but how many movies querying for each call? Or is it just sending one random ID of movie database to pick one movie? The rand function is using whatever random engine the database provides. So it's not going to pick all the data. It actually builds a query which picks one item or how many we tell it to pick by random. We can just take it and run it to see what it generates. So if we say run movie, you just ignore the warnings. They're from Searchlight. I don't know why. But you can see the query that is being generated. So it does a select from movies, and it does order by random, ascending, and it does limit 1. And we can also pass it, I think, limit 10. Yeah, which is going to return a collection of 10 movies. Let's see if we can see better. And it's basically the same query, ordering by random with a limit of 10. And well, the performance is pretty good also. Okay, let's see, where were we? Okay, so we did the movie partial, and now we can do the no results one. We're just creating the file, the empty file, which is going to be used when, well, now we seeded the database, but there's going to be the situation, for example, if the query for searching doesn't match any results, then we're going to have to say that to the users. And here, it's very simple. We just put an H4 and we say, sorry, there were no results found. Here is another type of embedding Julia code into the templates. So we can either use this kind of code where we can put multi-line content, Julia code, or we can use this string embedding when we use Julia's dollar notation, just to put small pieces of code within HTML strings. And in this case, the params is a global collection which contains the parameters of the request. So the expectation is that we're going to have a form which is going to make a GET request with a variable called search movies, and which is going to retrieve this this input, this param, and then we're just going to display, and it's going to show what the users had searched for. We're just going to see it in action in a minute. I think we can see it already. Let's see. See what happens. Okay, yeah. So this is our index page, our index view, which displays the title. And every time we reload it, it's just going to show a random selection for the user. We can see how the data changes and how it's being displayed. However, it looks quite ugly, so we can make it a bit nicer. And it's also a good opportunity to introduce the idea of layouts. As we have seen, the views have multiple hierarchies or multiple layers of hierarchical layers. Right here. So this part is being rendered by the partial, by the view partial, by the movie partial. The whole part here is being rendered by the view file, where we have the heading and the view partial being rendered in this piece. And they also have a higher level view structure, which is the layout, which is responsible for anything that is around the view. Okay, maybe we can also do this larger. And by default, a Genie MVC app comes with the layout here, which is being the app layout. It's a very simple, basic file. It's got a title, and it has this code block with the yield macro, and where this one shows the content of executing the controller is being placed. So pretty much the output of this is being rendered here. And because the layout is the part that is visible around the view itself, here we can apply or we can add HTML, which is going to be visible across all the pages which use this this layout. And we can include a CSS file, for example, for Twitter Bootstrap, just to make the page look nicer. I'm just going to load it from, oops, we're just going to load it from the CDN. All right. Some of the file apps are being created read-only, so they need to be overwritten or made writable. And now if we reload it, we should see, yeah. All right, so now that we applied the Twitter Bootstrap theme, basically that we loaded it in the page, we can see that the stars have been applied, and yeah, the page is much prettier. Okay. All right, we can now move to add the search feature. The idea being that when this page is loaded, we're still going to show this random title, but here in the middle, we want to put a text input, a search input, where the user can type a search term, and we will only return matching results. So we're just going to add the search form into our index view. We said we're going to put it under the title and above the list of results. And again, this is the HTML code. It's a div, it's a form, and then we have an input file where the user is going to input their search. The only interesting part here is the action of the form, which is dynamic, and it's being generated by using the link to function. A link to in this regard is the reverse of routing. The idea is that if, for example, we have an application which has multiple routes, and these we link to pages within the application, we don't want to hard code the URLs to the various section of the application. So we don't want to hard link the URLs which correspond to the routes. The idea being that if the need comes and we need to replace this with, say, something like this, then we're going to need to go and search for all the URLs which used to be /movies in all the pages, and that's going to break, possibly going to break the navigation, and is going to make the pages to be unreachable. As such, as the router is able to convert a URL pattern into a function which is being executed, the link to function is able to take some input, such as the name of a route, and create the corresponding URL back to the route itself. Each route that we created can be given a name, or if no explicit name is being given, Genie gives it a name by itself. For example, we can check all the routes that are now defined in the application, and we get the information. We see that they are defined to work over GET. They can also be by POST, delete, or other protocols. And we see that, for example, movies/movies goes to index and is being named get movies automatically by the router, or our initial route is just called get because it's the root. It doesn't have any kind of particle here. Okay. Then we also need to create this route that is going to be used by the form. So our form here is going to submit to this page, to this route. going to append it here, and we gave it a name. So yeah, Genie uses a naming convention, but if we want to control the name ourselves, we just pass it the name keyword parameter ourselves. So then we say that any URLs that go to /movies/search are going to be resolved by the ModelViewController search method, and this route is going to be search movies. So now when we say link to search movies, this piece of code will be able to generate this URL over here. Okay, let's add the search function into the ModelViewController. And we also need to add a few more modules. I don't think we need this. I'm just going to comment it out. Oh, I don't think this is needed. All right, so what we do now, we define the search method where we use Searchlight's find function, where we tell it to look for movie entities, and we pass a SQL where expression, which helps us filter the data from the database. This takes a query-like expression. So we're just going to search by title, category, description, or the actor. So any of them need to match the query string. And then we're going to retrieve all the movie results which match the query. What this is going to do is going to replace each question mark with one of the values provided as the second parameter. But because we're using the same search term in order to match all of them, I'm just basically creating an array which repeats the same term 4 times and is going to replace each of the question marks with the search term. The idea here is that if we use this approach, we protect ourselves against SQL injection. So if we would be to write the query by hand, and we would take the input as it comes from the browser, from the client, without sanitizing it, then we expose ourselves to SQL injection attacks. Somebody could just send some malicious input, which would break our SQL query and potentially would be able to run random queries against the database. But if we use the SQL where expression, then Searchlight guarantees that the input is going to be sanitized, and it's going to create the search query with the user input automatically. Okay, and then so the first time we used a random selection of movie. Now we actually find movies which match the search criteria. And then again, once we have the result, which we store in the movies variable, we're just going to return it as HTML, and we're going to use the movies index view file again. All right, let's see if everything works. Okay. So now we have our input here, and when the user lands without any kind of search, they still get a random recommendation. But now we can search for something like comedy. Okay, and we got an error. It says route name search movies is not defined. Okay, so it doesn't know what to do. Let's see why not. Search movies, probably something is bad. Why? What revise says, revise errors. What errors do we have? It says search not find. Okay, so revise said that ModelViewController search is not find, but we do have it here. So Maybe it cannot be recompiled, or maybe something bad happened. It doesn't seem to be. Let's see. And you're here. Controller search. Search movies. Wonder what happened. Okay. It should be okay. Let's try. Out. Okay, I think it worked now. Let's see. Now if we say comedy, yeah, it worked. Okay, so sometimes if Revise tries to reload the application while it's in a bad state, so for example, we edit a route and point it to a function or to a method in the controller that is not defined yet, of course, Revise won't be able to recompile the app, and that's going to cause it Revise to break. So we just have to go over and see what happened and just force it to reload the file where the problem was encountered, or worst case scenario, exit the REPL and reload the whole application and continue from where we were. Anyway, our search works. So for example, let's see if we take this. Yeah, we get this. I don't know, I've done some searches before, and this is going to return all the matching results. Okay. We did touch upon the params collection. Now we can see it clear. Our form submits a get request, and it passes the get param search movies with the value of the word that is being queried, and then we can retrieve it here in the params collection with the name search movies, and then we can filter our data based on that. Are there any questions up to this point? I think we're about done with the web app, so we can move on to quickly adding an API endpoint.
One question.
Please.
I now also execute from my PC, and it took a little bit longer than expected until the page actually loaded the search version. So
did
from
you
the expression,
or
I reloaded the app a couple of times, but just question whether it's sometimes taking half a minute or so, or whether it was another issue.
No, it shouldn't. I mean, probably there was some recompilation or something, but it should be really fast, right? So if you look at this, the query is very fast.
Yeah, thanks.
So
maybe I haven't saved
maybe Revise triggered some recompilation or something, but normally there shouldn't be any kind of issue. And yeah, it's just once the Julia code is compiled, it should move super fast. So query seems to go quite well, and rendering should be fine. Also, if you change, for example, the view that's going to be recompiled, so that can cause a delay. Let's see, it picks it up. Yeah, but that's still not. Yeah, it was noticeably slower. So now basically the whole view was being recreated because they noticed that the version of the view file is more recent than what's being created and available in the application. What happens here, however, and something that I noticed, and yeah, might take a bit of work, I'm not entirely sure how to address it, is that, for example, sometimes it's needed to refresh, or after some changes in the view, it will be needed to refresh 2 times in order for Revise to pick up the changes. And that's, I think, more because first first time the page is refreshed, revise is being triggered. So the change is being picked by the app. And only the second time you refresh, also the browser gets the new response from the application. So sometimes if you change the view, if you change the template and you notice that there is no change on the front end, it might need another refresh just to trigger the revise compilation. A way to address this is to use the auto reload plugin, which I didn't have time to go over it today, but it's really very easy to set up. The instructions are in the repo, and what it does, it's every time you work on the app and you save a file, being a view template or whatever controller or model, every time it detects that the file has been changed, it automatically forces the browser to reload the page that is being displayed, and also triggers a revise. So that basically removes the need to refresh the page manually. It just keeps doing it automatically by connecting with the page loaded in the browser.
Sounds great.
Okay. Makes sense? Okay. All right. Then the last part is to add a little API endpoint. There are multiple approaches to building APIs and multiple ways of setting up the routing. For example, one way to do it, especially if you're using a pure, let's say, REST approach where any entity which is exposed on the internet is a resource, and any resource is identified by a unique URL, the theory would say that either with HTML or with JSON or with whatever, sorry, regardless of how we access and how we request the response, the URL should stay the same. So that's possible. So we can have the same endpoint used to return the response as HTML or as JSON by using a different content type for the request. And then Genie exposes an API to check the headers and to see what kind of request is being sent. And based on that, we can create a response which matches the same response, the same content type. So for example, if it comes as application JSON, we can send back a JSON response, or if it comes as text HTML, we can send an HTML response. But then we need to basically look at the headers and build our response based on that. Another way to do it in regard to versioning, the idea is that once we expose an API that's being on the web, that's being versioned just like any other programming API. So once we have clients which rely on the interface, we cannot change it. That's why APIs are usually versioned. And one way to do this is that we can put the versioning in the URL. But again, the by-the-book approach would be to use a header which indicates the version of the API that we want to use, so that the URL stays the same. However, this again would involve working with headers, and I thought that for the demo it would make it much more involved, and it would be really harder to see the data exchanges. So then I opted to just use a different type of URL for the API. So we're just going to expose our API here. We're going to reuse the same logic, the same controllers. We put it in /movies/search API, and we need to add our search API function. Okay. Again, notice that things are not dry, so in production you wouldn't do that. This is duplicated, but just for the sake of keeping it simple, this should be removed, put in a separate function, and that function should be called from both these methods, so we don't have duplicated coding on our page. But now, just to keep it simpler and to see the process, we're just doing the same thing. Let's see here. We're looking at the search movies params as it comes on get. We create the query expression, we send it to the database, we take the result and we put it into movies. But the only difference now is that instead of using the HTML renderer, We're just going to use the JSON one, and we're gonna JSON encode the dictionary, which has as its root the movies string, and then it's just gonna take the whole payload of results and render it. Because we're using JSON, we also need to indicate it here that we're gonna want it. So I'm hoping this answers the initial question in terms of if Genie adds a lot of overhead. Because of its modular approach, it can be super light if none of the advanced features are used. But then it's really handy to just include any of the model and just basically just extend your application with any functionality that is available if the need arises. So now I have extended the controller to use the JSON renderer, and now I can use I can output JSON data from the application. This should be all. So let's see how it works. I just need to change the URL and keep the same search, and it couldn't find it. Let's see why not. So we put the route, we said movies, search API, movies controller, search API, movies, search API. Let's see what broke. Failed to revise routes, search API not defined. Okay, so again, the same thing issue. The routes file has not been revised, or it has been revised too early when the search API function was not available. Let's include the routes file again. And here it is. It's the same output, but now it comes in JSON form. Okay, that's about it. There was a small section, a bonus one about adding database backed authentication. So, for example, to add an admin section, I don't know, we have 6 minutes left. If you want, we can go over it. It's basically, it shows how to use a Genie plugin. So we're just going to add the plugin, we're going to install it. It's going to come with its files, and we're going to see how that's being done. Or you can just look at the repo and you can try doing it yourself, and maybe follow up on Gitter or in other places if you're running into problems. Or should we proceed?
I think it's valuable to sometimes have questions in case there are questions.
Mm-hmm. So let's see. Thank you so much. Can you briefly talk about your experience with large production environments? How many concurrent connection can Genie handle? Well, to be honest, I don't know about a lot of experiences with high load Julia web applications. The language is pretty new and is definitely not as widespread as traditional web programming languages. I remember I've been running some stress tests at some point with Genie in production mode. So basically all the development optimizations stripped away as it's supposed to run. No revise, no file watching, and no development features. And I'm going to share them. There was a thread, there was an issue on GitHub where we discussed and where we ran all these tests. Basically, the performance was on par with Ruby on Rails. So that's not very good in the sense that Julia has a lot of potential to get more performance, but Rails, it's at version 6, I think now. There's been a lot of effort to optimize it, and with Julia, very little effort has been put into optimizing. I think likewise, performance in Genie.jl can be improved. Like I said, Genie runs on top of it. but it does add some overhead. So pure HTTP.jl will be faster, but there's definitely room for improvement in both HTTP.jl and Genie, and it's something that is on my to-do list. And I think if we start putting effort in this direction, we're going to see very good results relatively quickly. So the code at this point is pretty much what comes out without any kind of focus on optimization. So I am aware myself that a lot of code can be optimized. We just didn't get to that. Yeah, how many concurrent connections? I will look and I will share it somewhere. I don't know where. I need to find the GitHub issue where we've been running the stress tests, and I will link to those. Load balancing. Yeah, well, I don't see why there wouldn't, but I mean, it can be done simply by deploying the Genie app on multiple servers and then using some sort of, I don't know, load balancing scheme. For example, I don't know, round robin or something else. Genie also comes with a caching layer. I forgot to mention that, which I like a lot, and it's I think it boosts the efficiency a lot. For example, especially if you have functions which are quite expensive and change rarely, maybe getting data from a third-party API and doing some kind of expensive computations. It comes with a cache module, and pretty much any kind of function can be cached. By default, it will serialize the result on the file system, but it also has multiple caching backends. So the result of the computation, the caching itself, can be stored in a Redis backend or in a memcache, and that can also be shared across multiple servers. So, for example, if you use a load balancer, we used it like that. Whatever instance generates the cache first is going to put it in the shared memcache or Redis instance, and then all the load balanced instances are just going to use the cache from the in-memory database, and that's going to speed things up a lot. The stress test we didn't have any caching enabled, so it were just pure JSON part rendering response, something like that.
Hey, just to add, you can use the meetup page. There's also for past events the possibility to add comments. I think this is the most natural place to add such further links.
Perfect. I'll also add the links to the repo and I don't know, any other resources, so that, yeah, if somebody gets stuck with the application or they want to look onto the last part, that would be available. You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. I don't know if anything else is worth adding. I think we managed to go over most of the things. Yeah, from my experience, so what usually comes up, and I didn't have the chance to go over, for example, the router, we didn't look at how to define other types of routes, for example, to handle post content or file uploads, but it's also possible. So if you create a form that knows how to handle file uploads, then Genie on the other side will has the API to save the file on the hard drive and just get the payload from there. In terms of deployment, there's also an issue that comes up quite often, and yeah, we're working on improving the docs, but there are some resources available in the docs, either using Docker or using Heroku. Also, Genie has a deploy module which helps Dockerize a Genie app. So you can create the application like we did now, and then we can use Genie deploy Docker to wrap it into a Docker container, which can then be used to deploy on hosts that support Docker. And I don't know. I think that's pretty much it. And these are the issues that come up most oftenly. So the question is, if I had some experience on serving machine learning models with Genie or HTTP for high availability, for example, bulk of sentiment labeling. I'm not sure what would this entail. Would the model be trained already, or is it that the URL is being accessed and the model is being trained while the request is being processed, or I think I'm not sure what the bottleneck would be. Well, I've done some applications more for Steeple. Some of the demos, for example, go over a recommender application, but it's really the issue there is not as much about the web app, which pretty much displays whatever Julia produces. So the performance there, or the bottleneck there, will be whatever the machine learning model computes or outputs, and the performance of the model itself. You can imagine that, for example, you're having a machine learning model instead of a database model in this regard. So instead of using a Searchlight model to retrieve data from a database, you'd have another module which would expose a machine learning model, which would return whatever recommendation or whatever data it produces. So the web front end would not have any kind of relation, or wouldn't add any kind of complication or delay. It would only come from the model. You basically swap the database model with a machine learning model. The really nice part about Genie is that it's purely Julia code, so it doesn't do anything out of the ordinary. A Genie app is just a regular Julia app. It uses package to manage dependencies. It uses the manifest file. It loads modules which are on the file system, or it uses other dependencies which are being installed in the application scope. So if you can run the machine learning model, or if you can basically produce a Julia script that runs on the computer, then it's really just an issue of adding a simple Genie shell, let's say, to expose the data produced by your Julia code and render it on the web using the HTML or JSON renderer or something else. Does that help the question or answer the question? Thanks for the question.
Okay, great. I think then it's time to kind of finish the presentation part. I would like to thank you very much, Adrian, for preparing this. Go through. Oh, so someone asked for the bonus. Yeah, we will have time. And if Adrian has more time to stay, we can go into the bonus afterwards. But as the official 2 first hours kind of are now over, where the meetup was scheduled for everyone to have kind of a nice cut here. Thank you very much, Adrian, for preparing this material and showing it to us. I did everything and it worked all for me. So awesome experience.
Thank you for the invitation. And first time that I'm doing live coding. So I'm sorry if it wasn't as smooth and flowy as I would have liked, but I'm hoping that it's been clear and I managed to show the more important points. And there are, well, if there are any questions, just please follow up on Gitter or on the Meetup comment section, or just find me on some of the other platforms, and happy to talk about it. I can stay for 10 more minutes if anybody wants to see the bonus. It shouldn't take long. I'm happy to. It should be quite quick, and I think it's interesting to see a bit of the plugins ecosystem. But I don't know, up to you guys.
So there was already interest from Eduardo's. I am also curious, so we can look into the plugin system.
All right, cool. So yeah, then with the plugin system, the idea was that many of the features were being added into the core, which became more complex, larger, harder to manage. This is more of an issue, for example, when adding Genie or when updating and when pre-compiling. So then it made sense to separate some of the functionalities which would not be part of the core into plugins. And that's especially true, for example, with an authentication plugin, which uses both Genie and Searchlight. So basically, it also needs a database backend, so it relies on multiple packages. Genie comes with the plugins API, which makes it really easy to create plugins for Genie. So it's got generator for plugins, which are just regular Julia packages and have Genie as a dependency. And also exposes an API to work with plugins. Thank you for coming. Bye-bye for watching. Yeah, exposes an API that makes it easy to work with the plugins, install them, and use them in the application. So one of the questions that comes up quite often is how to create an admin or some sort of authentication protected area of a website. And there's an authentication plugin for that. Because a Genie plugin is just a regular Julia package, we need to start by installing it. So we're going to go and edit. I'm running Julia 1.6, so now it does pre-compilation upon adding the package. So I precompile Genie authentication, and I'll precompile the application. And now that we have it, we can use the plugin. We're going to bring it into scope. And as I was saying, we can use the install method, this API, to set up the plugin into the directory of the application. Each plugin would come with a custom install routine. So for example, in this case, Genie authentication, just like we've seen before, with generating a new resource, Genie authentication will also generate its own resources. So it's going to have, let's just see it. Okay. So the plugin itself creates a series of resources which are placed on the authentication folder. It creates a controller. It controls its own views, so it provides views for logging in, for registering. It's going to create a model for managing the users. It's going to create a user validator because there are certain requirements for a valid user, like an email, a username, a password, and so on. It's going to generate a database migration, which will be which we can use and need to use to generate the corresponding database table. And then it adds in a plugins folder a file which is called Genie authentication. And these are similar to initializers. So both the files in initializers and the files in plugins are being loaded very early in the application's lifetime. So once we start an application, one of the first things it does, it loads the initializers and whatever it finds in plugins in order to make this functionality available later in the controllers, in the modules, in the models, and wherever it's needed. So in the sense, whatever it's in plugins, it's similar to an initializer, just that they're loaded right after the initializers. Okay, And then what this did, so we can see that it created a new resource with an authentication controller. We normally don't need to touch it. That's the idea of using the plugin. It created a series of views, one for logging in and one for registering. I don't know what else. The Genie authentication plugin, where it defines a series of routes and the dependencies that it needs, and the migration, which is this. We already seen the process of running a migration, so we should understand now how it works. We can see that. Oops, what happens here? We can see that Searchlight, for example, is aware that a new migration has appeared, and it's going to tell us that it's down. So the previous one is up, they executed it, and this create table users is not yet run. We need to run it, so we're just going to pass. Another way to run a specific migration is to just pass the name of it. This is the name here, so we just pass it here as a parameter to the app method. And this executed the migration, so basically it created the users table. This was the migration. It created a table called users, a primary key, and columns for username, password name, email, and it added the index on the username column. While the down method would just delete the table. Okay. We have now all the functionality that we need in order to authenticate the users, but we need to create something that we can protect with the password. So let's create a fictional admin controller. Notice here that I'm passing an additional option, which is pluralize false. By convention, controllers are pluralized. So for example, if I want to create a resource called movie, the controller will be called movies controller, because it's used to manage multiple movies. Same goes for the module which contains the controller. For example, it's called movies, while the model itself, sorry, for the module which includes the model, while the model itself is singular. So the model is movie, the module is movies, and so on. But here in the admin, it didn't make any sense to call it admins controller. So we're just going to say to not pluralize it. And that's going to create our new controller inside resources admin controller. Let's see where it is. It's here, admin controller. Again, it's just an empty Julia model where we need to put our code. When we installed the plugin, it created the initializer, the plugin's Genie authentication file, which is automatically loaded when the app is started. But now, because we added the plugin when the app is already running, we will need to load it by hand. So we're just going to do it, going to include it. This precompiles the authentication controller module or package. Taking a bit. Okay, so it executed the plugin file. It added the routes, and now we're able to log in. There are two routes for logging in. One is on get to show the login form, and one is on post. It's when the login form submits in order to perform the actual login, so to look in the database for the username and the password. And then we also have a login route. I think we can already see it, but we need to add the route. For example, we're adding the route to the protected fictional admin area. We're saying that we're going to have admin/movies, which is going to point to the admin controller index method, and it's going to be called get home. Because we're referencing admin controller, we also need to put it here. So we're going to say this. And we need to add the code in the controller itself. Here. Controller. Okay. Then what this does, it uses Genie authentication and it uses some of the other Genie modules, and it invokes a before hook. Before hook is a special kind of method, let's say. So when the code for a request is being executed by Genie, it's going to look for these special hooks. So if the controller, or if the handler defines a before method, that is going to be executed before the actual handler of the request. So in this sense, if we have a route, this one, which will try to execute admin controller index, before it actually is going to execute this piece of code. So it's going to check if any user is being authenticated with the request, and if not, it's going to throw an exceptional response, which takes a payload, and it basically will redirect the browser to the show login route. Show login route being registered by the authentication plugin. Okay, let me see. There are some questions. Frank, thank you. Yes, for sure. Let's talk about Searchlight, as we discussed. Yes, thank you for the feedback about the book. Yeah, it would be nice to come with the second version, and I discussed with the guys at Pocket. Things have been moving so fast in the Julia ecosystem that even the code in the book works. Many ways of doing things have changed between 2018 and 2021 in the last 3 years. So yeah, I also think a second version would be nice, and they said they're definitely happy to do one, but more likely when Julia version 2 will be out. So hopefully that will happen soon. Is it easy to restrict users to certain pages? So now, basically, the restriction applies to a whole section. So it's being applied at the controller level or at module level. But I think we could extend it so that it would apply, in a sense, to function level. Maybe we could couple it with routes, or maybe we can think of some sort of wrapper. But now the idea is that the whole controller, a whole module, will be protected. For example, like an admin section or something like that, which is going to include the whole admin protected area. There's another issue here. So there's authentication, but there's also authorization, which is different. And at some point I worked on that, but it's kind of a tricky issue. So I wasn't happy with the result and I scrapped it. But it would also, if you go into complex aspects, you also need to assign different roles to users. So in this sense, probably another Genie of authorization plugin would be more useful to say which user can access which functions depending on what roles they have in the system. Okay, so I think this should work now. We have the route, we have the controller. If the login is successful, you're welcome. If the authentication is successful, we should see a welcome admin message. Otherwise, we should be sent back to the login page. So let's see if it works, and hopefully I'm not logged in. The authentication is being stored on a session cookie. So let's see how if I have any from my tests. Let me go to admin movies. Let's see. All right, so the application created the sessions folder, and yeah, I didn't find any session because the application is new, so we didn't have any kind of session stored for my user on file. So then, yeah, the plugin basically redirected me to the login page. If I try to put stuff in here, it's not going to work. Just want to say that the authentication failure is just going to keep sending us back. You can see in the back end how the plugin queries the database. The password is automatically being hashed, so no passwords are being stored in clear in the database. And obviously, the reason why we can't log in is that we haven't really created any kind of admin user. We can look at this, for example, if we search using users. If you say all user, there's not going to be any. We don't have any kind of users in the users table. The question: where do query objects, session cookie live? How are they passed into before authenticated? Can authenticated also be called in index? So let's see. Admin controller. The authenticated method is being exposed by the Genie authentication module, if I remember correctly, but I'm not entirely sure. Is authenticated session. Let's see where it goes. Yeah, so it's part of the Genie authentication package, and it automatically uses the session system made available by Genie. As I was saying, this is the good part about convention over configuration. We know that there's a sessions and the cookie module, and that's available to all the packages that are using Genie as a dependency. When the session support is loaded, let's say, or when the module is loaded into the scope, the session headers are automatically being appended to the requests, and that everything is being done transparently by Genie in the background. If we look, for example, now we should see a sessions folder. Here it is. And this is the session that it has created for my user. This should be encrypted. It's also a binary file, so it cannot be displayed, but also it's encrypted. All the encryption in Genie is done using a unique secrets file, which is here. Every time a new Genie application is created, a new secret token, random, is being created especially for that application. So then each Genie application has a unique encryption key, and all the sensitive data is being encrypted with this specific key. I think it can be called, I don't know, we can try it. I don't know if it's going to work, but let's see. The pattern is to use it as a before, but I don't know, let's see what happens.
It seems also that this authenticated method just has two methods, two functions defined, and none with 0 arguments.
Let's see. Yeah, I don't know what this one finds, because authenticated, I don't know why it points to is authenticated. Because authenticated is a constant here. Is authenticated Genie session is set session. I think it goes into this one where it takes params. So because this is the only one which has a default param, so this one would match this one, is authenticated, and here basically the function just goes and retrieves itself the request payload. So all the information that comes with the payload, and then it looks into the session object to see if the user is authenticated based on the session data. Make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
No problem. Okay. I don't know. Let's see if this works. It might. I don't know. I don't see why not. Let's So let's try something. Oh no, let's try to go straight to it, right? So index is being served by admin movies. Okay, it's recompiling. No meta matching before. Okay, but why? Have we left any before? Okay, let's see what's from here. So I think it's still looking for before. Yeah, it may be that that's why it doesn't work, because it wants something to do before. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure. We can look into it, but it seems to be upset of the fact that there's no before hook being defined.
Maybe if you uncomment it and let it run successfully through every time, then it's redefined the before function.
Yeah, authenticated or, but I don't think this needs to return something, but I don't remember what. So it's either authenticated or true. Let's see if this works. It seems to have worked. Yeah. Let's try again. Yeah, it seems to work. So it basically keeps redirecting back to the login page. So I guess this, in a way, can solve the problem of adding authentication to a certain function and not to the whole module. But let's see if, for example, we do this, which would not be authenticated, and it should allow us to access it. So if we say, foo, foo. Let's see if it works. Foo. Foo. Okay, it should work. Again. Let's ask for out. Foo not defined. Yeah, okay, same problem. Include routes. All right, so it works actually. Yeah, awesome. So then, yeah, it doesn't need to be applied at module level. It can be applied at individual function scope, and then we can protect functions. Let's see if it really works by setting up a login. Movies. Okay, so let's create an admin user. Let's go back to the REPL and do it. We're just going to use Searchlight for that. What I'm doing is I'm creating a new instance of a user. I'm passing the email, the name, all the keyword properties, the password. For the password, because this doesn't go through the model, I'm just telling it to hash the password upon creating it now. So to store it hashed. Okay, and now I'm going to persist it. So now we should have an admin user. Okay, and now if we try to log in with it, let's see, it was admin and admin. What we said, So the password is admin, and the username was admin. Let's see if this works. All right, and it worked now. Welcome admin. So it basically allowed us to access the content of this. Okay. All right, that was it this time, also with the bonus. Any questions? Thank you for watching. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for the really good questions. Let me know if there's anything.
Really great. Thanks
so much
again, Adrian.
Thank you for the invitation. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed it. And I'm going to follow up in regards to the stress tests. And like I said, if there's any other questions or you know, if you want to get in touch, you're going to easily find me on all the channels, and happy to chat about it and discuss it in more detail. Thanks so much again for the invitation.
Okay, so then we approach open end. So if someone wants to stay longer, please feel welcome to use this opportunity to just code a little bit on whatever you want. I always think it's valuable to have such a space. And yeah, but anyway, some are already left. I wish everyone a lovely evening.
Okay.
And actually, yes, it's Adrian. I mean, it's only a few left, but can we already tell that in 2 months we may look into Stipple?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to if you enjoyed this one and if you found it interesting. Steeple is a different kind of beast. It's really more. I mean, Genie is focused and is geared towards web developers. But Steeple it's more towards researchers and scientists and data scientists. So it's a really high level tool for building data visualization applications, interactive data dashboards, and we're basically the package, the library itself. It's functional. It does plotting. It does UI elements. It does. Now it has LaTeX support, and we're working on visual application builder, which will allow to create this kind of reactive Julia web applications by dragging and dropping elements into place. Let me show you a bit. This is the page of the project. This is still work in project, but a work in progress. But this is how it's going to look. It's also going to provide a very easy way to deploy this application on the cloud. And then we'd like to add additional features. For now, the project is open sourced here in its current state. There are a series of demos. I showed off Steeple a bit at JuliaCon last year in 2020. So there are some demos. It can already be used to create this kind of highly interactive data dashboards, and they can be tried out. Meanwhile, I've also added support for plotly charts. So basically the charting support has been enhanced compared to the initial version. The UI is quite rich, and we can develop all sorts of highly reactive applications with all sorts of UI elements, and everything just updates in real time. The kind of single page applications that are being built with a lot of JavaScript, but with Steeple there's basically no need for JavaScript coding. Everything is just pure Julia code, which was like this in a sense.
Would be awesome to have a hands-on session on Stipple as well. Yeah,
it would be my pleasure. Absolutely.
Great.
Thanks so much. Well, in this case, if there aren't any more questions, I'm going to log off, and yeah, we can just follow up on the meetup comments and all the other channels.
Yep.
Great.
Great.
Thank you for your time. Have a good night. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye bye. Thank you.
See you. Bye.